We recently put out a question on the Blues Rock Review Facebook page about bands that ended too soon, and it got a lot of comments, a lot of reaction from people. Willie, I'm curious to get your thoughts. What are some bands that you think ended too soon?
I went through all the comments because I found this to be an intriguing topic. It gives a very good insight into a person by what they think is a great band and also what they think too soon is. And so first, Pete, I'm going to define what I consider to be too soon. The most important thing to me about too soon is that the band's trajectory is, if it's not going here, it's at least still going here. So I use that because I did see someone say, so some of the bands that I saw that I didn't quite agree with by some people, someone said that CCR ended too soon. I would posit, and I love CCR, I love them, but I would posit that if you look at their last output, they weren't doing this anymore. They had started to do this. So I don't know if that's too soon. I wouldn't put them in that category. Then there's the other problem too of bands that ended too soon. Band of Gypsies was a great band that a couple people put up there, which I agree with. I love that as a Jimi Hendrix vehicle. Similar with The Doors, similar to Lynyrd Skynyrd. All three of those bands, yes, they ended too soon, but there's a very good reason for that. And the reason for that is that there were deaths involved. And so do you consider that too soon? I usually think of too soon as bands that either through management disputes, band member disputes, people wanting to go their own way, that's what I think of as too soon. So the couple that I have that I don't know if I saw on the list, I always felt that Moby Grape ended too soon. I love that band. They're a psychedelic band from San Francisco back in the late 60s. I did see this on the list, but I have to reiterate it. Cream. Cream had a lot more gas in the tank. One of the original power trios. People think they're the original power trio. I'm going to mention what I consider to be the original power trio, even though it's in a different genre. The original lineup of the Wailers, Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, Bunny Livingston. They went their own ways because of Bob and Peter's disputes. I wish they had stuck around longer. The Flying Burrito Brothers. I thought they were a great sort of country rock band. And then I'll finish with this one, Pete, and then I'll let you have something to say here. But I didn't see this on any list or anywhere, and maybe I missed it. I think Guns N' Roses ended too soon. Pete, what do you think? What is your definition of too soon? Do you agree with mine? And do you agree with the bands that I've put out there? What bands were you expecting to see on that huge list of responses that you didn't see?
Yeah, Willie. So I would kind of agree with your definition of it. Obviously, you have a lot of bands or artists over the years, premature deaths. Clearly, that's too soon. I think with the context of this question, I think it more leans towards what you were saying, where, hey, this is a band on an upward trajectory, and then for whatever reason, they had a internal dispute or maybe something with management, and then it just ends too soon.
Yeah.
Now, looking at some of the responses on there, one of the interesting things was, and I'm going to focus more so on bands that have ended too soon in the last decade or so.
Okay.
So one of the bands that was mentioned was the Temperance Movement. And the Temperance Movement's out of the UK. Phenomenal rock band. I looked at them as kind of like the UK version of Rival Sons.
All right.
You know, Rival Sons out of the US, they have consistently, Rival Sons has consistently been one of the top blues rock and roll bands over the past decade. The Temperance Movement similar to Rival Sons, they were coming up around the same time. They were putting out really strong albums. And then all of a sudden, one day, it was just like, it's over. And it's kind of like, well, what happened? Because this band was putting out killer albums. I mean, they writing great songs, awesome musicianship, like the whole package. And then all of a sudden it just ends. And I think that's one of those bands, especially with like the blues rock genre, where it was just like, what the heck happened? Because they were a great band putting out great music, and you felt like they were still on that upward trajectory, as you mentioned, Willie. And it was just kind of like, well, what the heck is going on? One of the interesting ones that I thought mentioned in the comments was people were mentioning the Allman Betts Band.
Yeah.
And so someone mentioned Allman Betts Band, and it got like 400 some likes agreeing with it. And I thought that was interesting because the Allman Betts Band had mentioned that they were on a hiatus.
That's different.
Yeah. So I had a chance to be around those guys like right as this was getting formed, the Allman Betts Band. So I saw the Devin Allman Project and Dwayne Betts open up for the Devin Allman Project back in, I think this was 2018. And so I also had a chance to interview Devin Allman and Dwayne Betts the day of that show. And so during that interview, they talked about how they were writing an album together while they were on tour. So that was kind of the beginning of it. And back then, Devin Allman, he had his own thing, the Devin Allman Project, and Dwayne Betts had just put out an album. And so these guys already kind of had their own solo thing together. But as they were touring together, Dwayne would come on, they'd play Blue Sky, they would play some other Allman Brothers songs. And clearly they found that there was an audience for that.
Yeah.
And people liked them on stage together. And then they got Barry Oakley Jr. to join the band as well. And they started up the Allman Betts Band. But I don't think with that band, they were ever thinking like, hey, we're just going to do the Allman Betts Band and we're never going to do our solo stuff either. And so I don't think necessarily like the Allman Betts Band has gone away. Actually, when someone mentioned the Allman Betts Band, Devin Allman responded with like a smiley face emoji in the comments on there in that thread. So I don't think the Allman Betts Band has actually gone away. I think it is just a hiatus. Those guys always had their own solo projects. And so I don't think we've seen the end of the Allman Betts Band. And so I think it's premature to say that. Another band that I would... Go ahead, Willie.
Well, I was going to say then a band like Black Country Communion, which I didn't mention. These are recent. Yeah. Does that fall, in your mind, Pete, does that fall into a similar category as the Allman Betts Band? Do you feel that Black Country Communion, because I loved their stuff and then they were gone, are they gone or are they on hiatus?
I think it's a similar thing where they've kind of been on hiatus. Now, Black Country Communion, they're actually reuniting on one of Joe's upcoming blues cruises. And so that's a band that's never, I would say, dead. However, they're not, active at the same time. So I remember asking Joe about Black Country Communion a couple of years back, and he said, the band operates at a glacial pace. It's very, very slow. They've put out a handful of albums at this point. I would think, Willie, we will probably see one more Black Country Communion album.
Okay.
If you ask me to guess, I think we will get one more Black Country Communion album.
I mean, that's good. And I'd like to see that because they did what they did and then it ended and it was just so abrupt. And I think that's what
it was very abrupt after their third album, but then they came out with the fourth album. And so I don't think it's dead. I think we will see one more album from then. And then one other quick mention for me on a band that ended too soon. There was a young band out of the UK called Virgil and the Accelerators. and they had an album called The Radium, which back in 2011 was voted Blues Rock Review's #2 album of that year. They had a sophomore album, which was also voted to Blues Rock Review's top 10 albums. But then after that, it was just like they were gone, and you'd never heard from them again. And when they released that initial album, The Radium, these guys were teenagers when they put that album out that was voted #2 that year. And so this was a band where you were thinking, oh man, they've got that trajectory. This band is going on the way up. And then all of a sudden it just ended. And it was like, what happened? And so that's another band for me that I would mention. Well, what do you guys think? What are some bands that ended too soon? There's definitely a lot of them. Let us know down in the comments section below. We'd love to hear from you.